Usually when we picture Congress, the immediate image is one of noise, right? Lots of friction.
Oh, definitely. Like a really crowded, loud theater.
Exactly. You imagine these fiery debates on the floor, gavels banging, members just shouting over each other.
Reporters staking out the hallways, yeah.
Right, because there is this expectation that the gears of democracy should be, visibly and loudly turning. Welcome to Congress in context, by the way.
Glad to be here. And that friction you mentioned, it makes sense because that's the public-facing performance of the legislative branch.
Yeah.
The friction is kind of the point.
But then you look at the official congressional record for Thursday, July 2, 2026. This is right on the eve of this massive holiday weekend, the Semiquincentennial.
The 250th anniversary of the United States. A huge deal.
A massive deal. So you'd expect some soaring rhetoric echoing through the chambers, but instead you look at the log for the Senate, and the entire session lasted exactly 28 seconds.
It is. It's the absolute definition of a legislative paradox, a 28-second session.
I mean, you can't even microwave a cup of coffee in 28 seconds.
No, you really can't. The acting president pro tempore walks in, bangs the gavel to call the Senate to order, and less than a half-minute later, just bangs it again to adjourn.
So why even bother? That's what we're tearing into today in this deep dive. We are putting the July 2nd congressional record in context to understand how the machine operates when the theater is totally empty.
Because a 28-second session isn't just members wanting to beat the holiday traffic.
Right, exactly. There's a highly specific, almost invisible constitutional mechanism at play. But real quick, a casual housekeeping note. This is a completely independent, ad-free civic education project.
Which means we rely entirely on the listeners.
We do. So if you find this deep dive helpful, you can support our production infrastructure via the Buy Me a Coffee link right there in your podcast app's show notes.
Every little bit helps keep the lights on.
It really does. Okay, let's unpack this. We've got this 28-second Senate session. What is actually happening there?
So it's called a pro forma session. Pro forma is just Latin for as a matter of form. And to really grasp why they do this, you have to look at the power struggle that's literally baked into the Constitution.
Right, between the branches of government.
Exactly. Article 1 states that neither chamber of Congress can adjourn for more than 3 days without the consent of the other. But the bigger issue is Article 2.
Which gives the president the power to make recess appointments, right?
You got it. If Congress officially goes into a prolonged recess, the president can unilaterally fill vacancies in the administration or the federal courts.
Without the Senate having to confirm them at all?
Completely bypassing them. So the 28-second session is essentially Congress jiggling the mouse on the legislative computer so the system doesn't go to sleep.
Oh, that is the perfect analogy. So by having one single senator walk into an empty room every 3 days and bang a gavel, the Senate legally remains in session.
Yes. It actively blocks the president from making those recess appointments. It's this incredibly potent exercise of constitutional checks and balances, and it's happening in an empty room.
And the House did the exact same thing that morning, though they dragged it out to a grueling 2 minutes.
Really breaking a sweat over there.
Right. But here is where the story actually begins. Because while the floors were deserted, the paper trail left behind on July 2nd it's hundreds of pages long.
Oh, yeah. The committees were aggressively churning out these massive blocks of legislation.
States were lobbing demands at Washington. Members were quietly securing their legacies. Let's bypass the empty floor and walk into the committee rooms, starting with the House Energy and Commerce Committee.
They dumped a huge slate of health bills onto the legislative calendar.
Huge. And looking through these, it's not just random funding. They seem to be targeting the architecture of invisible long-term cognitive and genetic conditions.
They really are. They are targeting structural research gaps. If you look at H.R. 3491, the Deandra Dixon Include Project Act, it's a prime example of Congress forcing the scientific bureaucracy to change how it operates.
So what does this bill actually do?
Well, it establishes a dedicated program within the National Institutes of Health, specifically for Down syndrome research.
Okay, but it isn't just throwing money at Down syndrome in isolation.
No, not at all. It specifically mandates research into the causes of increased prevalence of co-occurring conditions. And it explicitly names Alzheimer's disease and autoimmunity.
This is where the biology intersects with the policy, because we know the medical community has recognized a link between Down syndrome and early onset Alzheimer's for a while now.
Yeah, it basically comes down to chromosome 21. Down syndrome is caused by trisomy 21, which means there's an extra copy of that specific chromosome.
And what's on chromosome 21?
The APP gene. That gene produces the amyloid precursor protein. Overproduction of that protein leads directly to the amyloid plaques that are the primary hallmark of Alzheimer's disease.
Oh, wow. So because of that genetic reality, people with Down syndrome are at a much higher risk.
A significant majority of adults with Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's brain pathology by their 40s.
But if the science is already known, I guess my question is, why does Congress need to pass a specific law to study it? Doesn't the NIH just do this naturally?
You would definitely think so, but the NIH is historically highly siloed.
Like, different departments don't talk to each other?
Exactly. You have the National Institute on Aging, handling Alzheimer's, and the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, handling developmental conditions.
They just stay in their lanes.
Right. Those massive research institutes don't always naturally share funding or data streams. By legally establishing the Include project, Congress is structurally forcing those silos to merge.
They're mandating collaboration.
They are mandating clinical trials that look across the entire lifespan, from pediatric development straight through to geriatric neurology. Because the genetic mechanism linking those two phases of life might hold the key to treating both Down syndrome and broader Alzheimer's populations.
Okay, that makes the mandate for biennial reports to Congress make a lot of sense. They aren't just asking for progress, they are demanding proof of institutional collaboration.
Absolutely. They want receipts.
And we see this focus on cognitive infrastructure again in H.R. 1493, which deals with traumatic brain injuries or TBIs. It reauthorizes the Bill Pascrell Jr. National Program for TBI Surveillance and Registries.
But it changes things up, right?
Yeah, it expands the state grants to specifically include American Indian consortia and mandates a massive HHS report on long-term symptoms and research gaps.
Which is so critical because TDIs are kind of the ultimate invisible injury. Historically, our medical system treats a concussion as an acute event.
Like you get hit, you rest in a dark room, you recover.
Right. But the epidemiological data is increasingly showing that TBIs are a chronic disease process. The initial impact sets off a cascade of neuroinflammation that can last for years.
And the challenge is that our national surveillance registries just aren't catching everyone.
They are wildly inadequate, especially in marginalized or geographically isolated communities like tribal lands.
Right. If a patient on a reservation suffers a TBI, they might not have access to a specialized neurologist to officially enter that data into a federal registry.
Exactly. Which means the federal government literally doesn't see them.
And if they don't see them, funding doesn't get allocated there. It's a vicious cycle.
Which is exactly why H.R. 1493 mandates that the Secretary of Health and Human Services directly assess the outreach efforts to these specific higher-risk populations. Congress is realizing that if the data is flawed, the funding model is flawed.
Speaking of geographically isolated healthcare, that brings up H.R. 3747, the AADT Act. That stands for Accelerating Access to Dementia and Alzheimer's Provider Training Act.
That's quite the acronym.
It really is. It reauthorizes the Project ECHO grant program, putting $10 million a year into technology-enabled collaborative learning for primary care providers in rural areas.
Project ECHO is one of the most vital mechanical shifts in modern healthcare delivery. It actually originally started in New Mexico as a way to treat hepatitis C in rural areas, and now they're applying it to Alzheimer's.
The model is called Telementoring, right?
Yeah.
I look at this like upgrading the operating system of local health networks rather than just buying them new hardware. Like, instead of trying to recruit a highly specialized neurologist to move to a town of 2,000 people.
Which is economically never going to happen.
Never. You take the primary care doctor who is already there, already trusted by the community, and you give them direct, real-time technological access to a hub of specialists at a major academic center.
That operating system analogy is bet on, because the traditional model is just a referral. A rural doctor sees a patient with cognitive decline and refers them to a specialist in a city 3 hours away.
And the patient probably just doesn't go.
In reality, yeah, they often don't. The barrier is just too high. The ECHO model flips that entirely. The local doctor presents the patient's case to the specialist network via video conference.
Oh, so the specialists guide the local doctor through the diagnostic and treatment protocols.
Right. The patient gets specialized care in their own zip code, and the local doctor essentially gets a real-time fellowship in neurology.
So these grants aren't paying for direct patient care. They are paying for the bandwidth, the administrative coordination, and the time for these specialists to run these virtual clinics with rural providers.
It completely changes the capacity of a local clinic.
It really does. And we see a similar capacity building strategy with HR 4348, the Kay Hagan Tick Act. It shifts funding windows to enhance health departments' ability to track vector-borne diseases.
Vector-borne diseases like Lyme or alpha-gal syndrome are expanding geographically due to shifting climate patterns.
And local health departments are the ones on the ground, right?
They are the ones that actually have to go out, trap the ticks, test them, and map the spread. If their funding is constantly in flux, that continuous mapping just drops off, and we lose our early warning system.
And continuity of funding is really the silent killer in federal policy. I mean, it's one thing to pass a law, it's entirely another to actually write the check year after year.
That is the hardest part of Congress.
Look at HR 8209, which reauthorizes the school-based health centers grant program. It changes the funding mechanism from saying such sums as may be necessary to a fixed amount of $55 million per year through 2031.
That is a very specific language change.
Why does that matter so much?
Because such sums as may be necessary is an authorization, not an appropriation. In the congressional process, authorizing a program just gives the government the legal right to spend money on it.
It's like getting a credit card approved but not having a limit yet.
Great way to put it. But the appropriations process is where they actually decide how much money goes on the card each year. If a law says such sums, it means every single year. That program is vulnerable to being defunded during budget negotiations.
Wow. So if you are a local school superintendent trying to hire a nurse practitioner for a 3-year contract at your school-based health center, you can't do it.
No, because you don't actually know if the federal grant will exist next October.
That is wild. So by locking in a hard number of $55 million, Congress is attempting to give those local administrators the fiscal predictability required to sign long-term leases, hire permanent staff, and actually integrate the center into the school.
Precisely. Predictability is everything for local planning.
Okay, let's shift our focus to the Small Business Committee because they also reported a block of bills, and I kind of want to push back on one of them.
Oh, let's hear it.
HR 2804 is the Protecting Small Business Competitions Act. It essentially codifies what is known as the Rule of Two into law.
The Rule of Two.
Yeah, which states that if the government is buying goods or services above a certain price threshold, the contracting officer has to reserve that contract for small businesses, provided they reasonably expect to get competitive offers from at least 2 small businesses at a fair market price.
Right. It's a mechanism designed to ensure that the massive purchasing power of the federal government doesn't exclusively benefit massive corporate conglomerates. It forces the government to look at the small business ecosystem first.
But wait, doesn't that inherently slow down federal procurement to a crawl?
It does add steps, yes.
I mean, if the Department of Veterans Affairs just needs to buy 10,000 laptops or restock basic medical supplies quickly, forcing the contracting officer to pause, conduct market research, find 2 small businesses, and verify that their prices are fair market value, doesn't that create a bureaucratic nightmare?
It definitely creates paperwork.
Aren't we just injecting red tape into a system that is already notoriously slow?
You are identifying the exact tension at the heart of federal procurement. Yes, it absolutely slows the process down, but it is intentional friction.
Intentional? How so?
The counter-argument to the efficiency concern is the long-term health of the defense and domestic industrial base. If the government prioritizes pure speed and convenience, contracting officers will just default to awarding massive bundled contracts to 3 or 4 giant prime contractors.
Right, because it's way easier to manage one contract with conglomerate than 50 contracts with 50 small vendors.
Exactly. But over a decade, that behavior literally starves the small business ecosystem. Small manufacturers go bankrupt, innovation stagnates, and eventually the government is held hostage by a monopolized supply chain that can dictate whatever prices they want.
Ah, I see.
So the Rule of Two sacrifices short-term procurement speed to ensure long-term market diversity. And codifying it into law prevents federal agencies from just ignoring the rule when they feel rushed.
Okay, I see the logic, even if the contracting officers might pull their hair out over the paperwork. We also have HR 5498, the Small Business Health Options Awareness Act.
This one is interesting.
Yeah, it mandates the Small Business Administration to aggressively market and explain individual coverage health reimbursement arrangements, or ICHRAs.
ICHRAs represent a major shift in how small employers handle benefits. Historically, an employer provides a defined health benefit, right? They pick a group plan, and you take it or leave it.
That's how most of us get insurance.
Right. But an ICHRA is a defined contribution model. The employer gives the employee a tax-free allowance, and the employee goes to the individual market to buy their own plan.
That seems like it gives the employee more choice.
It does, and it shields the small business from unpredictable premium spikes. But the regulatory framework is incredibly complex. It involves the Treasury and the Department of Labor.
So this bill is essentially Congress admitting that they built a tax vehicle so complicated that small businesses don't even know it exists, so they are forcing the SBA to become a marketing agency for it.
That is a very accurate, if cynical, way to read it.
Well, let's move from the functional, consensus-driven committee work to the ideological battlegrounds. Because the bills reported out of the Education and Workforce Committee represent a total tonal shift.
Oh, a massive shift.
We are leaving the realm of tweaking grant windows and entering the culture wars. Let's look really closely at H.R. 7661. This bill prohibits funds provided under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965 from being used on programs, activities, or literature for children under 18 that includes sexually oriented material.
It defines that very specifically.
Yes, explicitly defining that to include depictions of explicit sexual conduct, gender dysphoria, or transgenderism.
To really understand the gravity of this bill, you have to understand the vehicle it's attached to.
The ECA.
Right. The Elementary and Secondary Education Act is the cornerstone of federal involvement in K-12 schooling. It was passed in 1965 as part of Lyndon B. Johnson's War on Poverty.
So it's a huge deal.
It's massive. Title I of the ESEA provides massive financial assistance to local educational agencies with high percentages of children from low-income families.
So we aren't talking about a small niche grant here. We are talking about the foundational federal funding that keeps public school districts afloat, especially in impoverished areas.
Exactly. Tying a content restriction to ESACE is the legislative equivalent of using the nuclear option.
Wow.
It means that if a school district is found in violation of this content prohibition, they risk losing the core federal funding that pays for their reading specialists, their after-school programs, and their basic operational budgets.
That is incredibly high stakes. Now, the bill does include explicit statutory carve-outs. It states it doesn't prohibit funding for standard science coursework like biology, texts of major world religions, and what it defines as classic works of literature and art.
Those carve-outs are supposed to be a safety net.
But honestly, this feels like asking a public school teacher to walk a tightrope over a canyon while blindfolded.
The logistics of enforcement are incredibly complex.
Right. If the entire district's Title I funding is on the line, how does a local superintendent practically define where a classic work of art ends and prohibited material begins?
It's very subjective.
Take something like Ovid's Metamorphoses or certain Renaissance paintings. Who is the ultimate arbiter of what constitutes a classic? The federal government, a local parent board, a federal judge.
And that uncertainty changes behavior.
If I'm a school administrator, my incentive is to just strip the library down to the bare studs to avoid even a hint of a lawsuit that could bankrupt the district.
That exact phenomenon is called the chilling effect. And it's a well-documented outcome of legislation that relies on subjective definitions tied to severe financial penalties.
Right, because nobody wants to be the test case.
Exactly. The text of the bill claims to define these terms, but statutory definitions often crumble upon contact with real-world classrooms. The intent of the legislation is clearly to restrict access to specific modern frameworks regarding gender identity and explicit content for minors.
But the mechanism is what's so aggressive.
Right. Leveraging EAFE funds forces school districts to become hyper-cautious legal interpreters. It shifts the battlefield of the cultural debate directly into the financial compliance office of every public school in the country.
And we see this theme of using federal leverage to enforce strict compliance in higher education as well, with H.R. 7894, the Truman Scholarship Act.
Yeah, this one is interesting too.
It expands eligibility for the prestigious public service scholarship, but severely tightens the termination rules. A scholar can lose funding for disciplinary actions, felonies, or failing to submit reports. But the detail that jumped out at me is that the bill goes out of its way to explicitly define what it means to be affiliated with a political party for the scholarship's board of trustees.
It defines affiliation as being a registered member, an elected official, a candidate, or an official of a political party.
Why are they getting so specific?
Because the Truman Scholarship Board is designed to be bipartisan, But historically, the definition of political affiliation can be remarkably loose. You could have a board member who claims to be an independent, but has spent 2 decades working exclusively as a consultant for one specific party.
Oh, I see. So Congress is trying to codify ideological neutrality by locking down the exact definitions of partisanship. It's an administrative tightening of the belt.
Precisely.
We see the same thing with H.R. 7893, which mandates the Secretary of Education to cooperate directly with the Social Security Administration to verify the citizenship status of individuals applying for federal student aid.
And it includes a supremacy clause.
Yeah, essentially stating this condition supersedes all other provisions of law.
That phrasing, superseding all other provisions of law, is a massive red flag that Congress believes the executive branch has been using conflicting statutes as a loophole to avoid strict enforcement.
So it's a procedural mandate designed to completely lock down the federal student aid distribution network. Rounding out this committee block is H.R. 7895, the PBM Kickback Prohibition Act. This amends the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, or ERISA, to ban pharmacy benefit managers from paying kickbacks to brokers or consultants for referring a health plan's business to the PBM.
PBMs are a huge topic in healthcare right now.
We hear the acronym thrown around a lot when people complain about drug prices, but what exactly is the mechanism here? What do PBMs actually do?
Pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs, operate in this sort of dark space between drug manufacturers, health insurance companies, and pharmacies.
So they're middlemen.
Huge middlemen. If you get health insurance through your employer's health plan likely hires a PBM to negotiate drug prices, create the list of covered medications, which is known as the formulary, and reimburse the pharmacies.
Sounds like a lot of power.
It is, and over the last 2 decades, PBMs have consolidated into a massive oligopoly. 3 companies control roughly 80% of the market.
Wow. And the problem this bill is trying to solve is indirect compensation. If an employer uses a broker to help them select a PBM to manage their employees' health benefits, they expect that broker to find them the most cost-effective PBM.
Actually. But if the PBM is secretly paying a kickback or a high commission to that broker behind the scenes, the broker's fiduciary incentive is compromised.
Oh, because they aren't recommending the PBM that offers the best drug prices for the patient. They are recommending the PBM that pays the highest referral fee.
Exactly. By amending ERISA, which is the massive 1974 federal law that sets minimum standards for most voluntarily established retirement and health plans in private industry, Congress is attempting to legally sever that hidden financial bias.
It's a fascinating attempt to regulate a middleman by targeting the people who refer business to the middleman.
It's a very indirect way to tackle a huge problem.
Okay, so we've got Alzheimer's telemedicine, tribal TBI grants, small business procurement rules, massive culture war tripwires and K-12 funding, and PBM kickback bans. That is a staggering amount of legislative momentum.
It really is.
But remember, the House and Senate floors were completely empty on July 2nd. So how does a state interact with a Congress that is technically in session but physically absent?
They use formal, written memorials. The First Amendment protects the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances, right?
Right.
So in a legislative context, a memorial is a formal resolution passed by a state legislature and submitted directly to the United States Congress. It is entered into the official congressional record, meaning the state's demands are permanently archived.
And looking at the memorials entered on July 2nd, the states are not holding back. Let's look at Idaho.
Idaho had a lot to say.
They really did. The Idaho legislature submitted a stack of memorials that outline a deeply complex and frankly contradictory relationship with the federal government. House Joint Memorials 19 and 20 officially demand that Congress entirely eliminate the United States Department of Education.
Which aligns with a strict federalist view that education is entirely a state and local issue.
Right. They see the federal bureaucracy as an unconstitutional overreach. Sure. But in the exact same stack of paperwork, they submitted House Joint Memorial 11, urging Congress to fully fund the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA.
It's quite the contrast.
Right. They are demanding the federal government step up and pay 40% of the national average per pupil expenditure for special education as originally promised.
It perfectly encapsulates the tension of modern federalism. States despise federal oversight, but they are utterly dependent on federal cash.
They want to dismantle the administrative state that regulates their schools, but they demand the federal tax dollars required to subsidize their most vulnerable and expensive student populations.
That's the paradox right there.
And Idaho dives deep into the regulatory weeds, too. House Joint Memorial 10 petitions Congress to prohibit the inclusion of artificial sweeteners, specifically naming aspartame, saccharin, and sucralose in all school meal programs administered under federal law.
They are petitioning the highest legislative body in the land about the chemical composition of a middle school lunch tray.
It's so hyper-specific.
It really speaks to how pervasive federal reach is.
Yeah.
Because the federal government subsidizes school lunches, the USDA sets the nutritional standards.
So if a state wants to ban aspartame in schools, they can't just pass a local law?
Not without risking their federal food subsidies.
Yeah.
So they have to formally petition Washington to change the national standard.
That makes sense. Idaho also submitted Memorial 13, which reaffirms strict limits on the EPA's clean water jurisdiction based on the Sackett Supreme Court ruling. What is the context there?
So the Sackett v. EPA decision fundamentally altered how the Clean Water Act is applied. It narrowed the definition of waters of the United States.
Meaning what, practically?
It essentially ruled that the EPA cannot regulate wetlands unless they have a continuous surface connection to larger bodies of water. Idaho has massive agricultural and mining interests.
So this is about land use.
By submitting this memorial, the state legislature is formally putting Congress on notice. They're saying, we are claiming this deregulated territory, and we vehemently oppose any new federal legislation that attempts to reassert EPA jurisdiction over our local land and water.
Which tracks perfectly with Memorial 21, urging the Department of Defense to award grant money to American Tungsten for a mine project in Idaho. They want the EPA off their land, but they want DoD grants to fund their local industrial base.
And from a national security perspective, tungsten is a critical mineral heavily dominated by Chinese supply chains.
So Idaho is pitching its local mine as a solution to a federal vulnerability.
It's a very smart play. We see Louisiana playing a similar card with Senate Resolution 125, urging the Navy to quickly acquire a medium unmanned surface vehicle, or MUSV, to prevent the loss of high-tech talent.
Right. They are lobbying to keep shipbuilding jobs in Louisiana under the guise of naval readiness. And Pennsylvania submitted a resolution supporting the bipartisan TBI Adaptive Care Act, which neatly loops back to the traumatic brain injury grants we saw moving through the Energy and Commerce Committee earlier.
These memorials really are a pressure valve.
How do you mean?
They allow state lawmakers to take the hyperlocal friction they hear about from their constituents and formally elevate it to the congressional level. Even when the Senate chamber is empty, the constitutional machinery of petitioning the government is actively operating.
Speaking of that permanent record, let's explore the human element of all this. Because beyond state demands and committee reports, individual members of Congress use this quiet pro forma session to insert personal, historical, and local notes into the congressional record.
These are called extensions of remarks.
Right. And because this record is from July 2, 2026, everything is colored by the Semiquincentennial, the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence.
The tone in these remarks is deeply self-aware.
Oh, absolutely.
The members submitting these statements know they aren't debating a bill. They are writing a diary entry for the nation. They know historians will read these remarks centuries from now to understand what lawmakers were thinking on the country's 250th birthday.
It's fascinating. Representative Haley Stevens of Michigan submitted a speech that took a macro, soaring view of American history. She focused on the labor movement, building the middle class, the Wright brothers, the space race, the civil rights movement.
A very broad, optimistic sweep of progress.
But then you have Representative James Baird of Indiana, who took an entirely different, highly micro approach. He drafted a literal letter to the future explicitly designed to be placed in the Semiquincentennial congressional time capsule.
It'll be opened in the year 2276.
On the nation's 500th anniversary. It is such a remarkable historical document.
It really is. Because rather than focusing on abstract democratic ideals, Baird focuses on the material reality and cultural pride of Indiana in 2026.
He starts throwing out all these agricultural statistics. He wants people in 2276 to know that Indiana led the nation in popcorn, meat duck, and gourd production.
He highlights the state's massive steel manufacturing base, too.
And he dubs Purdue University the cradle of astronauts. He even wants the future to know the specific median home price in his district.
He is providing a baseline. He understands that what is mundane economic data to us today will be invaluable anthropological data in 250 years.
But he doesn't just stick to the data. He gets incredibly cheeky and injects his own sports fantasies into the official, permanent record of the United States government.
This was my favorite part.
Right. He writes, as if it's historical fact, that the winning margin of the 2026 Indy 500 was 23.3 milliseconds. And he claims that Indiana University had an undefeated football season, beat Ohio State, and defeated the Miami Hurricanes to become the college football playoff national champions.
That is amazing. By doing that, he's ensuring that his personal hopes, his regional pride, and his sense of humor are preserved as federal artifacts.
It completely humanizes the institution.
It reminds us that beneath the legalistic jargon of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, or for our procurement rules, Congress is made up of human beings who care deeply about college football and local agriculture.
And that humanization extends to the everyday citizens immortalized in this day's record, too. Representative Kelly Morrison of Minnesota didn't just submit a speech for the time capsule. She submitted a photograph taken by a local constituent named Bob Israel.
A photo of a loon family, right?
Yes, gliding across a Minnesota lake. That local photographer's work is now sealed in the Capitol until 2276.
The extensions of remarks serve as a civic eulogy and a community bulletin board at the same time.
Exactly. You read through the July 2nd record, and you find profound tributes to lives forged in adversity. Representative Brad Schneider submitted a moving eulogy for the late Dr. Mary Ross Cunningham of Waukegan, Illinois.
Her story is incredible.
She was born in rural Alabama, one of 22 children. She moved to Illinois, but in 1968, her husband was tragically murdered, leaving her as the sole provider for 4 children.
But instead of retreating, she channeled that tragedy into public service.
She really did. She spent 3 decades serving veterans at the VA hospital, fought for affordable housing, and broke barriers as the first Black woman to serve in leadership on the Lake County Board.
It's a vital reminder. We spend so much time on this show analyzing the friction of federal policy, but the actual fabric of American civic life is maintained by people like Dr. Cunningham, who turned personal devastation into relentless community service.
We see other local tributes as well. Representative Morrison honoring a retiring superintendent of 43 years and a local music teacher named David Davis, who won Minnesota Teacher of the Year.
Representative Hernandez of Puerto Rico honoring outgoing military commanders at Fort Buchanan.
And Representative Fitzpatrick recognizing the Bristol Borough Post Office, which was established by Benjamin Franklin in 1775 and is still operating over 250 years later.
The tension of the House of Representatives is that they are national legislators with highly localized job descriptions.
Right. They might be voting on a $1 trillion federal budget in the morning, but in the afternoon, their political survival depends on recognizing the retiring high school band teacher. So as these lawmakers spend the 250th anniversary in their districts, attending those local parades, eating hot dogs, and talking to their constituents, what exactly is waiting for them when they return to Washington?
Well, the pro forma quiet period ends abruptly. The House and Senate reconvene on Monday, July 6th, and they are returning to a massive backlog of new work. Just on July 2nd alone, dozens of new bills were introduced and routed to committees.
Yeah, for example, Representative Adams introduced H.R. 9571 to establish a minimum wage for all federal contractors.
Representative Gottheimer introduced H.R. 9578, tackling the tech frontier by requiring AI-generated content to be labeled with metadata.
And Representative Jayapal introduced H.R. 9581 to establish a produce purchasing pilot program for certain households.
And remember the committee reports we discussed at the beginning.
The bipartisan health grants, the PBM kickback bans, the highly polarizing ESEA cultural funding restrictions.
Exactly. Those have all been formally reported out. They are now sitting on the calendar for full floor debates. The rest of the summer will be a volatile mix of trying to push through necessary biomedical funding while navigating explosive partisan cultural traps.
And the minority party is not just sitting idly by, waiting for the majority to schedule those votes. The record notes that Representative Jamie Raskin's Discharge Petition 24 is actively gathering signatures.
The Discharge Petition is one of the most aggressive procedural tools available to the minority in the House.
How does it work? Exactly.
Normally, the majority party's leadership and committee chairs have total dictatorial control over what bills make it to the floor for a vote. If they don't like a bill, they just bury it in committee forever.
Right.
But under House Rule Ex Vit, if a member can get a physical piece of paper signed by an absolute majority of the House, which is 218 members, they can forcefully discharge that bill from the committee and demand a floor vote bypassing leadership entirely.
But that requires members of the majority party to actively defect and sign a petition against their own leadership's wishes.
It is incredibly rare for them to succeed.
But the fact that it is actively gathering a massive block of signatures shows the tactical pressure the minority is applying. The gears are always turning.
The friction never stops.
Which brings us to the end of our analysis of the July 2, 2026 congressional record. I want to sincerely thank you for joining this deep dive. Navigating the complexities of our government takes time and effort, and we appreciate you spending that time with us.
We really do.
Just a quick note. If you find this kind of independent, ad-free civic education valuable, you can help support the production infrastructure that makes it possible. There is a Buy Me a Coffee link right in your episode description, and using it goes a long way to keeping this project sustainable.
And we strongly encourage you to interact with the primary sources yourself. You don't have to take our word for it.
Definitely not.
If you want to read the specific structural carve-outs in the EA funding bill, or track the exact status of the AI metadata legislation, go to congress.gov. You can search the bill numbers like HR 7661 or HR 9578 and read the raw text.
And once you read them, reach out to your own representatives. Ask them where they stand on the Down syndrome research mandates or the PBM kickback bans. Check the committee schedules. Democracy is an active pursuit. It requires engagement far beyond casting a ballot every 2 years.
Look at the people honored in today's record.
Exactly. The teachers, the local politicians, the veterans advocates, they shape the country through daily granular action.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over. Representative Baird's letter to the year 2276 forces us to confront the fact that we are currently living through the history that future generations will study.
It really changes your perspective on the mundane details of your own community.
It does. So ask yourself this. If you had to write a one-page letter today to be sealed in a time capsule in the Capitol and opened by Americans 250 years from now, what single achievement from your local community would you want them to know about?
That's a great question.
And perhaps more importantly, what specific warning would you give them about the year 2026?
It is a heavy question. Think about what goes into your time capsule. Thank you for diving deep into the context of Congress with us. We'll catch you next time.